All right, gentle and lowly lesson number 2. I'm going to try to work through this video a little quicker than I did the first one. We'll see how I do with that. Notes will be posted in the GroupMe. You should probably look at those as you go through this video. Scriptures posted for you at the top. Chapters are posted for you at the top, and there's a main idea of what we're trying to get across to students. That's mostly for you. You can read that at the end if you would like, but that's mostly just to give you a short summary of what we're trying to get across. Then you're going to open up your time with this question of, do you think that Christians can lose their salvation? So kind of a zinger of a question to start off with, and then ask why or why not. So don't let students just say yes or no. Make sure they think critically and give evidence or reasons why they're saying what they say. Let that discussion go on as long as need be. I don't know what kind of reaction you'll get from students, but if you're getting a lot of different perspectives, this can be a complicated topic. Let them air all of those out before you jump in with John chapter 6 verse 37, which Jesus says, "Whoever comes to me, I will never cast out." And so that should go a long way towards ending that discussion and saying, no, Christians can't lose their salvation. Anyone that's truly been saved will be saved for eternity. And so you're going to kind of relate this back into our series and what we're talking about. So last week we focused a lot on the approachability of Christ and how he allows all sinners to come to him regardless of any qualification. He doesn't put any limit on who can come to him. And so a lot of it was based on just coming to Christ for salvation for the first time. And then this week we're focusing more on after we've already done that, after we're already saved. Then what? How does Christ react to our sinfulness even though we've already been saved? Is Christ still gentle and lowly with us after we've come to him, or does he lose a little bit more patience? And you want to say that Christ's heart is not just gentle and humble and welcoming when we come to him for the first time, but it stays that way. It perseveres with us throughout our Christian life, regardless of our worthiness. So even when we're not worthy of him doing that, he remains that way with us. And then you may want to hit some on why Christ will never cast us out, why Christians can't lose their salvation. This is important to hit on, that this doesn't mean that Christians can get saved and then go on with the rest of their lives and do whatever they want. I want to fight against that. We do have to be sanctified. We do have to be holy. We do have to grow in Christ's likeness throughout our Christian lives. And we all know a lot of people that claim to be Christians that aren't doing that and have never done that. And so we would say those people aren't actually saved, that there needs to be fruit in your life, obedience to Christ in your life. But how can both of those things be true? It's because Christ actually guarantees our sanctification. He guarantees those that have been truly saved will become more and more like Christ throughout their lives, and they'll never abandon Christ fully. They'll never apostatize and deny Christ. And it's simply because Christ won't allow it, that he guarantees that we'll be sanctified. Ortlund gives a good example of this, of a father walking into the pool with their 2-year-old kid. You can read more about that in the book. But essentially, that 2-year-old's grip is not necessarily strong enough. Even though they're trying their hardest to hold on to their father, they can't. And so the father actually, his grip is what sustains it. His grip is what makes sure that 2-year-old stays afloat and stays connected to the father. It's not actually the 2-year-old that's holding on to their dad with their grip. It's the father gripping on top of theirs. And then 1 Thessalonians 5:23 and 24 is a good cite text for that just says that essentially that God guarantees. He's faithful, and he will guarantee that we're sanctified because of the indwelling of the Spirit. True believers will be sanctified. They will be made more like Christ. And because of that, they can't ever be cast out. They can't lose their salvation. Then you're going to dig deeper into John 6:37 and ask why Jesus said this. Why do you think it was necessary for Jesus to say this? Why did John write it down? And Ortlund covers this a lot in the book as well, that the language here is super strong in the Greek, that it's like, I will never ever cast you out. And so Jesus worded this really strongly, and John wrote it that way. And Ortlund says that's because we're prone to think the opposite. We as humans are prone to believe the opposite about God, that he will cast us out, that we're prone to think that God will not cling to us and that we can lose our salvation. That's naturally how we think. Ortlund calls us excuse factories for reasons why God shouldn't cling on to us. And so it's necessary that Jesus words this so strongly and puts this promise in here for us. And then the last one for this topic, last question, is you're going to ask if this is more of a doctrine or more of a desire. And you may have to define what doctrine is, but it's kind of a trick question. The answer is both. But I think usually as Christians, we just think of this reality as more of a doctrine, that this is the way it is, this is the way things work, this is just who God is, it has to be this way, and so we teach this as doctrine. And though it is doctrine, it's also a desire on behalf of Christ and on behalf of God, and we don't want to ignore that. It's important that God and Christ have ordained it to be this way. They could have made it differently. They could have, just like a father walking into the pool with their 2-year-old can decide not to grip on tightly, and he could say, let's see if they can hold on, and if they can't, then they'll slip and they'll have to swim, and we'll see if they can swim back to me. God could have made it that way, that I'm not going to guarantee that they'll be sanctified. Let's see who can do it on their own, who can really be sanctified on their own, and if they walk away from me, let's see who comes back. But he didn't. He chose to guarantee that we'll be sanctified, to cover up our weaknesses, because he knows that we're not strong enough to cling to him by ourselves. And so it's important for us to know that God has chosen for it to be that way. It's a desire for him to, once we come to him, for him to protect us, to keep hold of us. And it's important that we see that. And that's a lot of what we're trying to hit on in this series, is this balance between looking at God as having genuine emotions and looking at God as kind of a robot, these two opposite ends of the spectrum. And so we can't talk about God as having emotions in the same way that humans do. Although we share emotions, like we both get angry, ours are tainted by sin. So when we get angry, it's can be blown out of proportion, or it can be underwhelming for some things, or it can be misguided. And God's anger is perfect. It's never misguided or misplaced. It's never too much or too little. It's always just the right amount. And so he doesn't have our emotions and God emotions can't be the same, and we want to fight against that. But we also want to fight against us thinking that God is emotionless and he's just this robot, and God is just the way that he is, and that's the reason why things are the way that they are. Thinking like that makes us not push in to actually know God and to love him. It makes us keep him at a distance. It prevents us from building a genuine relationship with him, just like you wouldn't be able to build a great relationship with a robot. God has to be genuine. He has to have desires. He has to have emotions, and we have to know that in order to press into him. And so we're kind of fighting this battle on two fronts, and we're going to try to find that balance between the two throughout the series. Second point you're going to talk about is how Christ is then sympathetic with our sinfulness, and you're going to open this one up again with questions. So ask them who they typically go to when they're really struggling with something, when they're battling something in their lives. Who's their kind of go-to person to talk to? You just need to name mom, dad, brother, sister, best friend, something like that. And then you're going to push further into that and ask them what happens if you go to somebody and you're kind of sharing your struggles in life with them. And it's obvious that though they're sympathetic and they're sorry, they just can't relate to what you're saying. So you might want to have a personal example for this. I have a good one. Audrey works at a place that has different lingo, and you wouldn't understand what goes on there unless you work there or work in a similar environment. And so she'll sometimes explain to me how her day was frustrating and use all this weird terminology, and I have like no idea what's really going on. And so I can be sorry and say, feel bad, I'm sorry that your day went that way, but I can't truly sympathize. I can't really empathize with how she feels because I just don't understand what's going on in her life. And sometimes when we share with people, we get that same response. And then you're going to push that into a spiritual reality. So what about Christ? When we take our struggles, our burdens to Jesus, can he relate to us? Does he just feel sorry and sympathetic for us? Can he empathize with us? How well does Christ relate to us? Let them answer that. Let them dwell on that for a second, and then dig into Hebrews 4:15, which says that we don't have a high priest, which is Jesus, who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, and yet is without sin. And so you're going to hit into two aspects here, how he sympathizes with our weaknesses. So talk about, I think usually we would think that our friends and our family and other humans would understand our weaknesses more than Jesus could, because, Jesus is God, and of course, he sees our weaknesses, but he can't really sympathize with those that much. Jesus can't sympathize with our struggles in life that well. But in reality, Jesus was a real human, and he experienced all the pain and weaknesses, the full breadth that we experience. He knows how it feels to lose a loved one, to be betrayed by someone that he loves and cares about, to be mocked, to appear as something that isn't special to society, to be kind of overlooked. He knows how it feels to be hungry, to be thirsty, to be anxious, even to the point of sweating blood before he goes on the cross. Jesus has experienced this full breadth of weakness and trouble and distress that we feel in life. Jesus felt all of that, and he still has those experiences, and so he can relate to us in our weaknesses better than anyone else could, even though we oftentimes overlook that. And then Jesus is also sympathetic with our sinfulness, and so we really struggle with this one because Jesus was perfect. So they're going to ask, how is it possible that Jesus can sympathize and even empathize, I would say, with our sinfulness, even though he was without sin? And in this one, you're going to talk about the end of that verse where it says that he was tempted, yet without sin. And Ortlund provides, again, a good example here of, I think it's actually from C.S. Lewis, walking into a full gust of wind. That if you're walking into 50-mile-an-hour winds, it's really hard. And if you get tired and you lay down, you stop experiencing how difficult that is. Because you've given up. And that's us in temptation, that we experience temptation and we fight against it sometimes, but eventually always we give up. We give in to temptation, and so we stop experiencing the struggle with sin when we give into it. But Jesus is the person that keeps walking into the wind face first, and he never lied down. And so he feels the full weight, the full battle, the full struggle of what it is to try to not be sinful, the full weight of temptation. He can empathize with that because he's been way further than we have in the battle against sin. And so he understands that it's hard to fight against sin. He understands the feeling that we have of trying to fight through that. And so he can empathize with us much more than we think that he can. We think that Jesus is a lot less relatable than he really is. And then your last point is going to be that Jesus and Christ is gentle with our sinfulness, and that comes just a couple verses later in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 2. It says that he, again, still talking about Jesus, he can deal gently with the ignorant and the wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness. And so you're going to ask here, what does it mean to be ignorant? What does it mean to be wayward? Let people give you definitions about that. What is the Bible talking about when it says that? Eventually you're going to explain that this is pulling back from the Old Testament, which a lot of Hebrews does. It's rich with Old Testament references, and it's actually calling back these two categories of sin that were in the Old Testament. And ignorance was kind of like unknowing sin or accidental sin. Like I sinned and it wasn't necessarily on purpose. Like I didn't see it coming, or I didn't know that this was a law, or something like that. And then there's this other category of sin that's called high-handed sin or wayward sin, and it's like sinning intentionally. Like I know that this is a sin, I know that this is against the law, and I'm going to do it anyways. And so those are the two categories in the Old Testament, and the punishment for those two is different. Just like it would be today, we have some laws like murder, whether there was intent or premeditation and you were really planning to do it or not, goes into how strict the punishment is. But here the author of Hebrews puts both of those together, and he says Christ deals gently with both of those. Whether we sin on accident, unintentionally, intentionally, Christ is gentle in response to that. And so that's again furthering the point that Christ is still gentle with our sinfulness even after we come to him. You're going to ask, I already kind of went through that, but you're going to kind of lead them to that. Why does the author put both of those categories here? It's to show us that Jesus deals gently with all sinners, no matter how offensive or intentional their sin was. And then you're going to get into application a little bit to close out. What should we do in response to knowing that Jesus is sympathetic with our sinfulness, sympathetic with our weaknesses? He's gentle with the sins that we commit. How should we respond? And this is, again, similar to last week's application. It actually comes straight from the text. And if you want to read from 15 all the way through verse 2, that may help alleviate this or tell them to look at the surrounding verses in Hebrew, see if they can figure this out. But verse 16 actually calls us to the proper response. It says, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." And so because Jesus is sympathetic, because he's gentle with our sinfulness and our weaknesses, we should draw near to him, and we should do it confidently. Emphasize that. That's important, that we're not kind of inching towards the throne, shrugged over, really worried about how Jesus is going to react. But we walk in there not arrogantly, but confidently knowing that Jesus is gracious and Jesus is merciful and he's sympathetic and gentle. And so we can walk in with confidence knowing that we're not going to find harsh judgment, disproportionate anger, but we're going to find help in our time of need. He's going to give us grace to overcome our sin. He's going to give us mercy to forgive us of our sins. And so we, again, should just draw near to Jesus, come to him when we're sinful, when we're struggling, when life is difficult. We should not shy away from Jesus, but we should press further into him. That's what he wants us to do, and he's waiting there with mercy and with grace. And again, you can kind of wrap up here, tying back into last week, that last week we looked at Jesus on earth a lot and how Jesus was sympathetic and gentle and lowly towards people while he was here. And what these verses are trying to do, and what we're trying to do this week, is show that Jesus is not different now that he's no longer on earth. He's still in heaven. He still has a resurrected human body, and he still has all of these experiences. And so Jesus hasn't changed from what he was in the Gospels. He's still approachable. He's still gracious and merciful and gentle and lowly, even now and even after we've come to be saved by him. So send me any text or give me a call if you have any questions about this stuff. I'll be praying for you this week. Please let me know Thursday, and I'll probably text you who all shows up to Life Group, how many you have, how many from that Sunday group actually come on Thursday, because that might change what I do with them on Sunday. And then feel free to change these notes, as always. This is like the easiest format for me to read through and quickly understand and teach from, but everyone's brain works differently. And so I know for a lot of people this is really jumbled and it's too much information or maybe not enough. And so change the notes, write them in a way that's easy for you to look at and teach from. Feel free to take some stuff out. Feel free to add some stuff in. I want you to be really comfortable with the notes and with the lesson going into it. And so that's why I give you the video and the notes way ahead of time, so that you can kind of make them your own and digest them well, so that you can teach it from your own heart rather than just kind of regurgitating what I've said. So good luck on Thursday, and I'll see you next week.